What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name's CJ. This is Out of Bounds DFS, and in today's video, we're going to be switching it up. Of course, it's March Madness time, so how could we not talk some college basketball? On today's slate, we got a few games here to talk about. Not a whole lot of teams playing today, but just enough for us to make a super solid video for you. So we're going to be looking at some of the fantasy projections. We're going to be looking at some of the single stat stuff that is up over on the PrizePicks board for today's slate of college hoops. If this is your first time on the channel, welcome to Out of Bounds DFS. On this channel, we talk all things single-player daily fantasy sports. That's PrizePicks, that's Monkey Knife Fight at times, and some of the other sites as they continue to pop up. Our primary focus is PrizePicks and NBA, but today, as I mentioned, we're going to be switching things up and talking some college basketball. So hopefully you guys enjoy the video. If you do, hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, smash that like button if you like what I'm doing here. So without further ado, we've got 4 games to talk about that are up on the PrizePicks board for today. Starting things off here with Mount St. Mary's versus Texas Southern. That game tips off at 5:10 p.m. And if you look at the total points here, 132 in a 1-point spread. This game, it's not the most highest scoring in terms of totals, but the spread is good and competitive. And, this is college hoops, whole different beast than NBA. These young fellas are going to play major minutes here. Next game we have up on the slate is Drake versus Wichita State. That game tips off at 6:27 p.m. This, out of the 4 games today, is the highest total at 141 points. Massive total here. Looking at a 2.5-point spread with Drake being the favorite in this one. So this could be a potential here for big time upside, whether it be fantasy points, whether it be real life points when we go and we look at those single stat plays over on PrizePicks. And then finally, the next game tips off at 8:40 p.m. That's Norfolk State versus Appalachian State. And this game total is 133.5, and you're talking about a 3-point spread here. So this is going to be the 3rd highest total on today's slate. Should be a pretty good one there. And then finally, the last game, UCLA versus Michigan State. 2 very storied colleges facing off here at 9:57 p.m. We got game total of 134 points with a 2.5-point spread. Michigan looking like the favorite in that one. So with all of that in mind, we're going to be using RotoWire today and taking a look at some of their fantasy projections and also taking a look at some of their props for single stat, in this case, points. So the first guy up on the board is Michael Weathers for Texas Southern. Now, he's got a big fantasy projection of 34 points. So if we head on over to RotoWire here, they've got a bunch of free projections. We've got the FanDuel projections preloaded here on RotoWire, so we can kind of get an idea of Michael Weathers and his projection. Is it too high? Is it too low? Well, we're going to find out. So Weathers at 34. He is also at 34 over on RotoWire. So guys, this is looking like a very good projection for Michael Weathers. This is going to be one of those ones where, I don't know, you might have to flip a coin to figure it out here. Now, he does play 33 minutes per game. 1.06 fantasy points per minute. His usage rating is at 29.1%. And today he's expected to play 33 minutes. As I mentioned, college hoops, all of these guys are going to play a ton of minutes, at least the star players. But for the season, he's averaging 19.6 19.6 real life points and 5.7 rebounds. So kind of gives you an idea of what to expect from Michael Weathers. Now, if we take a look at the single stats for Weathers, they've got him at 17.5 points. And I already mentioned he averages 19.6 points. So if I were to lean one way here, it looks like it would be for the over on his single stat points. Let's see if we've got him up on any of the betting sites here. Doesn't look like he is up here. They don't have any Texas Southern up here from the looks of things. So we don't have anything to talk about here in terms of Texas Southern or Mount St. Mary's up on the board. Looks like they've just got Michigan State, Drake, UCLA, and Wichita State up on the board. So we'll get to those guys later. But anyway, you could see Michael Weathers, 17.5 points. That may not be enough here. This may be a situation where we would take the over based on his average being almost 2 points higher than where he's projected today. All right, so back over to the fantasy scores here. Let's see who's next up on the board. We've got Damian Chong Kui. I hope I'm saying that right. I don't know. Sometimes I butcher these names. He's at 30 fantasy points today. If we take a look at his fantasy projection over on RotoWire, you could see that they've got him at 32.89. So they like him to go over 30 fantasy points. Now, if we scroll over and look at some of his stats here, you can see that minutes per game, this guy plays almost 40 minutes per game, so he's out there a ton. Now, he's not a big fantasy point per minute guy, 0.73 fantasy points per minute. Not super high. You see some of these guys like Michael Weathers at over 1 fantasy point per minute. You got a guy down here like Carl Nichols who's down at who's up at 1.09 fantasy points per minute. So those guys are elite. The closer you can get to 1 fantasy point per minute in college basketball, the better. So at 0.73, not terrible, but also not in that elite realm. Now his usage rating's pretty good too at 25.1%. He's expected to play his total here of 39.8 minutes. So they look like they used his average for the season, minutes per game, to project his minutes tonight, because it looks like for all of these players on the board, their averages and their projected minutes are exactly the same. So as far as points go, he puts up 14.1 points per game and 5.1 rebounds per game. So there you have it for Damian Chong Kui. They think that he's going to go over his 30 fantasy point number. The next guy we have here is John Walker, Texas Southern. He's projected at 24. If we head back over here to RotoWire and find Mr. John Walker here, they've got him at 22.95. So they like the under on John Walker by over a point. They think he's going to go under this 24 fantasy projection. Now, if we take a look at some of his stats here, you can see he plays about 26 minutes per game, 0.87 fantasy points per minute. So that's pretty darn good. That's getting closer and closer to that 1 figure that I talked about. Usage rating is not great, 18.6, but he does average 11.9 points per game with 5.9 rebounds per game. So there you have it for John Walker, the under looking like the way to go. The next guy up in this game is going to be Nana Opoku. Guys, I'm gonna butcher some of these names. I apologize ahead of time, but let's find him over here on RotoWire. You can see that he's projected at 25.07, so quite a difference here. They got him at 28.5 over on PrizePicks, 25.07 on RotoWire. So, I mean, this could be a situation where you take the under on this dude. Now, he's playing about 37 minutes per game. His usage rating is just 19.9, fantasy points per minute 0.68. So not very impressive in terms of fantasy points per minute and usage rating whatsoever. He averages 13.1 points per game and 6 rebounds per game. So that gives you an idea of kind of 2 of the major stats there and where he averages out in those. So that's going to do it for that game. Let's go ahead and move on to the next game. And the next one we've got is Drake and Wichita State. Now, starting with this game, we could start talking about some of the, single stat and fantasy point stuff. So the first guy up on the board is Shanquan Hempel. I think I'm getting that right. So let's find him over here and look at his fantasy points first, and then we'll start looking at some of his single stat, in this case, points. So we're looking for him on the board here. Not seeing him. Let's see if I could do a search on his name. There we go. Well, the reason I'm not seeing him is because he is a game time decision. So that might be one to avoid. So let's move on to the next guy and look at Ty Etienne. I'm bad at this. All right, he's projected at 35.84 fantasy points, which puts him way over this 29.5. So maybe this 29.5 is way too low for Ty Etienne. I hope I am saying that right. Anyways, for the season, 36.1 minutes per game, 0.85 fantasy points per minute. Very good. You can see it's highlighted in green there, indicating green is good. His usage rating, 24.2, and his Average points, 17.6 points per game with just 3 rebounds per game. So this guy is a pretty big time scorer. You can expect a lot of real life points for him. One of the higher scorers on today's slate of games at 17.6. Speaking of points, let's go and see if we can find him over on the single stat. And they have him at 18.5 points, which is more than his average of 17.6. Let's just take a look here and see if they have him up on the board on RotoWire for single stat points. They do not have him up on the board listed. So we can't make any kind of wager here on the points over or under. But I will say that this 18.5 points is higher than what he has averaged for the season. So maybe taking the under is the way to go there if you think that he plays closer to his average in today's game. So let's move back over to Fantasy Score and see who else we have here. We've got Joseph Yusufu, who is representing Drake here. 26.5 fantasy points. Let's find him over on RotoWire. They've got him down here at 22.24, which would put him well under his projection of 26.5. Now, let's look at his minutes. He plays about 34 minutes per game, 0.84 fantasy points per minute, and his usage rating is over 31. That's got to be one of the highest usage ratings of anybody on today's board. Now, he averages 19.4 real-life points per game, just 1.7 rebounds per game. So while we've got him on our mind here, let's go back to single stat and see if he is available. There he is, 16.5 points. So that seems kind of low, right? I mean, 16.5 and the guy is averaging 19.4 for the season. That seems like an easy over on his points. Is he up on the board here? Yes, we've got our first guy up on the board. Now, they've got him, DraftKings Sportsbook has him at 14.5 points. Right now, people are smashing the over on 14.5 points, meaning they think he's going to score over 14.5 for sure, which, 14.5 still less than 16.5. So the real question is he going to score more than 16.5 points? 14.5, though, seems like a no-brainer, no doubt. Now, you can see he's over here on points bet at 16.5 as well, but right now, not seeing any juice really strongly in one way or the other, whether it be the under or the over on this 16.5 points. But keep an eye on points bet later on in the day. That could potentially go up for the under or up for the over. So something to keep an eye out on. Going back over to the fantasy scores here. Let's see who's next for us. We got Al-Tariq Gilbert, 25 fantasy points for Al-Tariq Gilbert. Now, they got him at 25.72 over on RotoWire. So if we take a look at some of his other stats here, he plays 31.2 minutes per game. Fantasy points per minute, very good at 0.82, puts him up there in some good company in terms of being one of the higher fantasy points per minute guys. His usage is right around 24%, also pretty good number too. If you look at his average points, he's not a big-time points guy. 11.8 real-life points per game, 3.2 rebounds per game. Do we have him up at single stat? We do. And over on the single stats, we've got him up at 11.5, which puts him a little bit under his average of 11.8 points. So they think he's going to go for slightly under 11.8 points at 11.5 over on PrizePicks. Let's see if we can find him here. And yes, DraftKings does have him up on their sports book at 11.5. People right now seem to be favoring the under, thinking that he will not score 11.5 points, that he'll score somewhere under that. Now, if we scroll over and look at points bet, they've got him up at 10.5. Now, right now, we're not seeing any action either way, the over or the under. Things are all tied up here at 115 for both. So definitely keep an eye on these sports books throughout the day. You can find all this stuff here on rotowire.com, and things move quickly in the DFS and betting world. So you have to keep an eye on these things. And once you start seeing a trend or seeing something move, you got to act quickly. Timing is everything, man. It is super key. All right, back over to Fantasy Score. We're going to take a look at the next guy here. And that is Devontae Carter for Norfolk State as they take on Appalachian State. So let's go find Mr. Carter. Not seeing him on first glance. Let's do a quick search, make things easier for ourselves. There he is. He is projected at 30.5 points. So that puts him about 1 point under where he's projected on PrizePicks today. So if you believe that RotoWire's projections are accurate and good and trustworthy, then you would want to take the under on Devontae Carter. But let's look a little further into how he has done. 34.8 minutes per game this season, 0.9 fantasy points per minute, one of the highest fantasy points per minute producers that we have on today's slate. Usage ratings at 24, good but not great. And his projected minutes, they got him projected to play about 35 minutes tonight. For the season, 15.8 points per game with 4.8 rebounds per game on average. All right, so let's flip over and see if we've got him up for single stat. And they do. They've got him at 16 points. So they expect him to score somewhere around 16 real-life points today, which puts him right around his average of 15.8. So let's just take a look here and see if they have him up for single stat points. And they do not. So we have nothing else to really go off of or look at in terms of betting action on Devontae Carter and this single stat of 16 points. So, yeah, we can go ahead and probably move on from here. Now, the next guy on the board for fantasy score is going to be Adrian Delph, who's at 26.2. Kind of a weird fantasy score. Some of these fantasy scores are just a little wonky. 26.2, 23.8. You just don't see that a lot here on NBA anyway. So 26.2, Adrian Delph, Appalachian State. So let's take a look and see where they've got him on today's board on RotoWire. Well, they got him at 29.49, so that's quite a bit higher than this 26.2. So again, they like him to go over 26.2 by a few points today. Now, his minutes per game, 37.8, really good minute average there, 0.69 fantasy points per minute, and a usage rating of 25.4. Now, his average points per game are 14.9 with an average rebound of 5.8. So that'll make up a bulk of his fantasy score today. Let's go see if they've got Adrian Delph on the board here for real life points. PrizePicks has him up at 15. Does he make the cut here on these sports books? He does not. I don't see his name up on any of these sites here, so we can skip ahead and talk to the next guy. So after Delph comes Joe Bryant for Norfolk State, 23.8 fantasy points. So we head back over to RotoWire here and we'll look for Mr. Bryant. Joe Bryant, he's at 26.55 fantasy points, so they like him to go over his fantasy score of 23.8. You can see he plays about 27.2 minutes per game. Not a ton of minutes, but with the minutes he does get, 0.98 fantasy points per minute, guys. Creeps really, really close up to that 1 fantasy point per minute number there. 22.5 usage rating and 13.7 real life points and 5 rebounds per game. So Joe Bryant looking quite nice there. Next guy up is Joe Forrest for Appalachian State. He's at 26.8. So let's go find Mr. Forrest. I'm sorry, Justin Forrest, not Joe. I was talking about Joe Bryant before. Justin Forrest. So Justin Forrest is at 26.8 fantasy points. They got him at 27.61 over on RotoWire. So based on that, guys, they like the over on Justin Forrest. Now, minutes per game, 35. 0.86 fantasy points per minute and a usage rating of 30.9. This dude's usage rating is through the roof. Fantastic usage for him. He averages 18.8 real life points per game, and his average rebounds are at 4. Let's see, do they have Justin Forrest up here on RotoWire? No, they do not. They don't have him up for any single stat points. So unfortunately, we don't get to talk about that. So we could go ahead and move on to the next game, which is UCLA versus Michigan State. And we're starting things off with Jaime Jaquez or Jamie Jaquez. JJ? It's JJ. Everyone's favorite guy. All right, let's talk about JJ real quick. That's what I'm going to call him. He's JJ for me. His fantasy points are at 23.11, which indicates that we should be taking the under versus PrizePicks today, who has him at 24.7. Now for the season, 32.3 minutes per game, 0.72 fantasy points per minute, and a usage rating of just 16.6%. Not a fantastic usage rating for this young man. He averages just 10.3 points per game and 6.3 rebounds per game. So with that in mind, we're going to take a look and see if they have him over on the single stat, and they do. So let's see if they have him up on PrizePicks. All right, PrizePicks does have him up at 12 real-life points for single stat. So let's take a look here and see where they've got him up on the DraftKings Sportsbook. They've got him at 10.5, but as you can see, the action here is pretty split. I mean, you're talking 112 for the under, 112 for the over. So I'm not seeing any juice one way or the other, under or over, on this 10.5 points. So if we scroll over here, we can look at PointsBet. PointsBet has him at 10.5, and people are betting the under. They don't think he is going to score more than 10.5 points so far. So people are betting the under on 10.5 points. So if they're betting the under on 10.5 points, well then we damn sure better bet the under on 12 points, right? Keep an eye on this as this develops throughout the day. Things could definitely change here, but it seems that his average of 10.3 points is much lower than this 12, and it's leading people to believe that he is going to score less than 12 in this matchup against Michigan State. So this one could be a good one here. Keep your eye out for that one. All right, so back to fantasy score. Let's see who's next here. Aaron Henry, 32 fantasy points. Big number for Mr. Henry. You might even say O. Henry if you're familiar with the O. Henry candy bar. But look at this, guys. Big difference here. You got him at 24.5 on RotoWire versus this 32 over on PrizePicks. So, man, that's a huge under. I would be hard-pressed not to want to take the under in this situation here. Now, his minutes per game are at 34.4 minutes. His fantasy points per minute are 0.92. Fantastic in terms of fantasy points per minute. One of the higher guys here on today's board. And his usage rating also very good, 29.1%. So things are looking good here in terms of fantasy points and usage percentage. Now, you can see that his projected minutes, he's one of the few that have lower projected minutes than his minutes per game this season. He's projected at 30 minutes, so that's a little head scratcher for me, why he would be playing less minutes in a big game like today. For the season, he's averaging 17 points per game and 5.7 rebounds per game. So that gives you a little bit of an idea of Aaron Henry. They're super low on him on fantasy points for RotoWire, and they do have him up here. Yes, they do have him up here on the various sports books. So let's take a look at PrizePicks and see where they've got him up today. We go to Aaron Henry. He's at 16.5 real life points. Well, DraftKings has him at 15.5, and so far people are taking the over on 15.5. So people believe that he will score over 15.5, but will he score over 16.5? That is the real question here. Now, if we scroll over to PointsBet, you could see that at 16.5, people are still taking the over on 16.5 points. So clear indicator that 15.5 and 16.5 or more points is definitely within reach for Aaron Henry today, especially when you consider that for the season, he's putting up 17 points. So this would be a good situation to take an over in terms of single stat real life points on Aaron Henry. Liking the way that's looking. All right, going back here to fantasy score, we've got Johnny Juzang, and I am probably killing this guy's name, but we're going to look at Mr. Johnny, another JJ to look at. JJ from UCLA. All right, his fantasy score or fantasy projection over on RotoWire is at 20.72, which puts him a few points under this 24. So if you believe in that kind of thing, then you'd want to take the under here on this dude. He's playing about 33 minutes per game this season, 0.87 fantasy points per minute with a usage rating of nearly 30%. So very good numbers in terms of fantasy points and usage percentage. Now, today his projected minutes are at 29. I don't know, again, why he would be playing less minutes in an important game like today, but that's what RotoWire thinks. So I'm just presenting the facts, the news to you guys. For the season, 16.9 real-life points scored per game with 5.8 rebounds. So that should make up a bulk of what his fantasy production will be today. So let's take a look and see if they've got him up here on the single stat for points. They do not have him on any of the various sports books from what I am seeing here. So we can go ahead and wrap it up for Juzang. All right. Next guy on the board is going to be Joshua Langford for Michigan State. He's at 19 fantasy points. So if we look at Langford over on RotoWire, do a little searchy search, make this quicker. Joshua Langford's at 14.21 fantasy points. Man, that is quite a bit lower here. Talking about a big difference in projections from one site to another. This one's one of the bigger ones. Few points here, 4 or 5 points under where he is on PrizePicks today. So they like the under. For the season, he's playing just under 32 minutes per game, 0.65 fantasy points per minute, usage rating at 20%. So pretty low numbers here in terms of fantasy points and usage rating for Joshua Langford. Now, they expect him to play 26 minutes today. Again, much lower minutes than what he's been playing on a per game basis for the season. And then speaking of for the season, he's averaged just under 10 points per game at 9.7 and 5.2 rebounds. Let's see if they have him up here on the board. Langford is up here at 10 real life points. So let's go find him over here on PrizePicks real quick. All right, so they've got him at 11, which puts him up higher than what he averages for the season. As I mentioned, he averages 9.7 real life points for the season. They got him up at 11, so they expect him to score an extra bucket or two today. But based on the various sports books and how people are betting, they got him at 10 on DraftKings right now. People are taking the over at 10 at a minus 124. So if we look at points bet, hey, get out of here. If we look at points bet for Langford, they've got him at 10.5, and still people are taking the over on this 10.5. So, you could take the over here on Langford. It looks like worst case scenario. Maybe you run into a situation where it's a push, but looking like the over is the way to go here, and hopefully he breaks 11 and hits for you. So there you have it for Joshua Langford in terms of his real life points for single stat. Now, moving on here, we got a few more guys to talk about from this game. We've got Jules Bernard, who is at 23. Let's see where Mr. Bernard is on RotoWire. They've got him at 22.04, which puts him about a point under his projection today on PrizePicks. So if you like that, then you would probably want to take the under. Now for the season, he's played 32.2 minutes per game, 0.66 fantasy points per minute, and his usage ratings at 21%. 12.2 real life points average per game with 4.5 rebounds. So that'll make up a bulk of this fantasy score that you're seeing for him today. Let's see if Mr. Bernard is on the board here for real life points. He is not. Don't see his name up there. So easy enough for us to move on to Mark Watts, Michigan State's point guard. He's at 11.5 fantasy points today. So let's look up Mr. Mark Watts. Now, I don't see anybody named Mark Watts. I see Rocket Watts. Is Rocket Watts and Mark Watts the same person? I could be wrong here, but let's look. Mark Watts, Michigan State. All right, when I put in Mark Watts, Michigan State, Rocket Watts comes up. So he is Mark Rocket Watts Jr. You have to forgive me. I don't know all of these guys inside and out, so I just wanted to make sure we were talking the same person here. So Mr. Mark Rocket Watts is at 11.5 fantasy points. They got him at 9.61 over on RotoWire. So you can see taking the under looking like the way to go here on Watts. For the season, he's played about 23 minutes per game. Averages just a half of fantasy point per minute. Terrible number there. Usage rating 22.5. Not good at all. Today, he's expected to play 17 minutes compared to 22.9 minutes that he's played for the season. So his minutes might even go down in this matchup. And for the season, he's averaging 6.4 points with 1.6 rebounds. So kind of a shaky dude, if you ask me. Now, let's see if they have him up on the board for single stat real life points. They do. He's all the way down here at 6.5 points. Now, I believe he was at 5.5 points at one moment yesterday, but now he is up to 6.5. So let's take a look and see where they've got him on the various sports books. All right, so you can see Rocket Watts here, 7.5 points. They got him on the DraftKings Sportsbook to go over. Right now, the juice is over on the 7.5. They think he's going to score more than 7.5 points. Man, it's hard for me to trust that when I look at this guy's stats. The fact that they've got him projected to play less minutes, that he averages just 6.4 points per game this season. Ooh, I don't know. I don't know if I feel good about taking this dude here at the over on 6.5 points. But yeah, PointsBet, none of these other sites have him up for anything. So there you have it. You got to make a tough decision there on Mark Watts and these real life points. All right, so we're going to flip back over to Fantasy Score and finish this thing out with Tiger Campbell and Joey Hauser. So first things first, Tiger Campbell, Tyger, not Tyga, not Tiger like Tiger Woods, but Tiger with a Y. All right, he's at 19.46 fantasy points, which puts him over his projection of 18.5. So they like the over, does RotoWire. For the season, he's played 34.5 minutes per game, 0.51 fantasy points per minute. His usage rating, 18.5. Not a great usage rating, not a great fantasy points per minute guy. So looking a little iffy. They project his minutes to be slightly lower than what he has played for the season for UCLA. Now, his average points, 8.8, and his average rebounds, 1.4. So this isn't going to be a guy who's going to put up major numbers for you. But the big question is, will he go over or under? And so far, looking like RotoWire likes him to go over 18.5. Let's see if they have Tiger Campbell up for single stat. They do. They've got him up at 8.5 points over on DraftKings Sportsbook. PrizePicks has him at 9. So on this 8.5 that we're seeing on DraftKings Sportsbook, we're not really seeing any action one way or the other right now. They are both knotted up here at 112. But we can slide on over to our friends at PointsBet, and you can see that PointsBet, they have him at 9.5 points, and right now people are hitting the over on this 9.5. They think that he's going to score 10 or more real-life points. So if you believe in that thing, then you should go over here to PrizePicks and hit the over on Tiger Campbell and do it now before they change it, because you know they will. They will change this on you. And finally, guys, the last guy on the board that we need to talk about is Mr. Joey Hauser. So let's head on over to RotoWire and look at Joey Hauser real quick. And then that will do it for today's video. So big difference here in site to site. So they've got Joey Hauser for Michigan State at 14.5 over here on PrizePicks. But guys, he's at 20.28. 20.28 over on RotoWire. And probably the big reason that you're seeing a difference here is the fact that for the season, 19.5 minutes per game. But today, they've got him projected to play 26 minutes. So they expect him to play about 6 to 7 minutes more than he typically would during the regular season. Now, his fantasy points per minute, not bad. 0.77 fantasy points per minute. 24.9% in terms of his usage rating, also pretty decent for this guy who's coming off the bench. You can see he's got 0 starts, 0 out of 10 starts. And then for the season, 8.3 points per game with 3.9 rebounds per game. So let's go and take a look and see if they've got him up here for single stat points. They do, and I'm seeing some strong action here on him. So let's take a look at PrizePicks and see where they've got this guy set up here for his actual points that he'll score today. So they got him at 8.5. Over here on DraftKings Sportsbook, he is at 9.5. And at 9.5, people are just smashing the under on this dude. They don't think he's going to score 9.5 points today. So going under is the way to go. So maybe he doesn't score 9.5. Maybe he scores 9. But if he scores 9, that puts him over 8.5. So that makes me a little worried here. This one could be a bit tricky. And we don't have any other sites to compare to, such as PointsBet. So in this one, expect Joey Hauser to score less than 9.5 points according to how the juice is going on this single stat prop for him. But the trick is it going to be 8 points or is it going to be 9 points? You know, it's a little tough one to figure out, but that is going to do it for today's video. We made it. We went through all of the college basketball games for today's March Madness slate. So hopefully some of this information helps you out when you go to lock in your PrizePicks lineups for college basketball tonight. This is CJ for Out of Bounds DFS. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video and share with a friend. Be a nice friend and do that for them. Good luck tonight. I hope you guys make some money. And until the next one, guys, peace out.